Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and this week joining us from London in the UK is Salvatore Rinaldo. Hey Salvatore, welcome to the show.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Salvatore, how do I pronounce your name properly in Italian? How would that be?
Oh, you did it perfectly fine, Salvatore. And most people call me Sal anyway.
All right, cool. So Salvatore is an agile coach and Scrum Master based in London. His background is in telecommunications and software engineering. And for the past 7 years, Salvatore has been helping organizations leverage lean, agile, flow principles, and systems thinking to achieve better business agility. So, Salvatore, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Right. So I am originally from Italy, and soon after graduating university, I moved to the UK. And for the first few years, I worked in the UK as a programmer, software engineer. And then I discovered first XP and then Scrum around 2009, 2010. I became a Scrum Master almost by chance, I would say. I was working at TomTom at the time, and the job title Scrum Master didn't even exist in the organization, but most teams were adopting Scrum or trying to adopt Scrum for the work that they were doing. And so that happened to my team as well. To be honest with you, Vasco, I did it really, really badly for the first couple of years. And I remember reading this book, Scrum and XP from the Trenches, which you probably know about. And I learned a lot from it. But, going from theory to practice was a real challenge. My focus at the time was still on technical leading my team. And so we focused on getting the work done, essentially, not much on the continuous learning journey and on the improvement journey. But we did get a lot of benefit from Scrum combined with XP practices.
Yeah, that's a theme we've covered sometimes here on the podcast as well. XP or extreme programming is definitely a topic that all Scrum Masters out there should look into. It was a collection of practices that were put together by people who were actually delivering software, just like the manifesto said, right? Like we're learning how to develop software by doing it ourselves and helping others following these values. So, of course, as you said, the beginning of the journey is not always easy, especially if you start early enough. Before Scrum was a very popular and widely used method with lots of internet content around it. Like today, in 2009, I'm guessing it wasn't so much like that. And because today is Monday, we dive into the Fail Monday question, of course. So, Salvatore, tell us a little bit more about what might have been one of those learning experiences you had early on in your Scrum Master career. Tell us that story.
So I will pick one of my experiences that goes back a few years when I was a senior Scrum Master and I was working for a large bank here in the UK on a big transformation project. On paper, we had a really good setup. We were really following best practices. We had a decent amount of automation and good cross-functional team structures in place. We had, the usual challenges around organizing backlogs at scale and also getting value out of scale planning sessions and things like that. But on paper, you would look at it and you would feel this is actually a very good adoption of Scrum at scale. Now, as a Scrum Master, if you look at what's going on behind the scenes, although we get a good product out periodically and we can satisfy our customer, which was obviously our priority, behind the scenes, you could see an organization where the mindset shift was not happening and the culture wasn't really changing as a result of
Can you give us an example of what that looked like?
So the day-to-day operations, if you like, of these teams were still fairly bureaucratic. Decisions were being made often outside the team by leaders, often without providing the context around decisions being made. So there was a lack of transparency. With all the best intentions in the world, of course, I don't mean to say that any of these leaders was doing the wrong thing on purpose. But as a Scrum Master, I found myself and other Scrum Masters working together to really try and bridge between what the leadership teams were deciding and how these decisions would impact the teams that we were working with. Unfortunately, the role of the Scrum Master had been positioned in a way that was very much team focused. The expectation of the Scrum Master was that you would work with the team, help the team improve, but you wouldn't have much scope to really talk to leaders outside of the team and really try and change the system. So I worked there for a while and we got some really good results out. But as a Scrum Master, I found myself having to do a lot of bridging, having to take a lot of initiative myself to try and nudge things forward without a chance to really influence the system at play. The lesson for me there was that as a Scrum Master, you really have to have the opportunity to change the system you're playing with gradually, incrementally. We all know it's an incremental journey, but it has to be a journey. Often the role is positioned in a way that doesn't allow the Scrum Master to do this.
And I want to explore that a little bit further, because I'm hearing some of the listeners out there saying, but wait a minute, Salvatore, that's what the Scrum Master is supposed to focus on, right? Like it's not, Scrum Master is not supposed to focus on the system, is supposed to focus on the team, but you have a different perspective. I want to hear that. So how do you see it?
Absolutely. If we go back to the early revisions of the Scrum Guide, for example, you could see that the role of the Scrum Master really was focusing on three entities at the same time: the team, the product owner, and the organization at large. And one of the roles for the Scrum Master was to work with the entire organization and coach the organization so that Scrum can become the status quo, can become the norm. I don't mean to say that Scrum itself is an end. It's obviously a means to an end. But if the organization wants to achieve its goal and Scrum is adopted at the team level, we have to organize the organization, the system, in a way that Scrum is easier to adopt. Because otherwise we'll have, two systems trying to compete with each other.
And we very often see that, right? Like in our practice, at least, I don't know about you, but I'm guessing you see that too, where you at the same time, you see this strong expectation on teams to deliver software consistently and regularly. And then you see an organization that has separated the development from the operations and delivery or deployment of the software. And there's very little cooperation between these two teams, right?
Absolutely.
Operations does the deployment and the teams do the development, and there's not really much dialogue going on. That's one example. But what other examples do you see out there that tell you that the organizations aren't being set up to make Scrum adoption easier?
Yes, one very quick example, I'm sure you've seen this yourself, is component teams instead of real cross-functional teams. So these teams are essentially aligned to functions and capabilities rather than being aligned to the flow of value. So the first thing that you need to do as a Scrum Master or Agile coach when working with these organizations is to actually show that if you map the flow of value and if you optimize your flow, you stand a better chance of achieving your goals, which is ultimately what they want. Another quick example, and I'm sure you've also seen this, and your listeners will have seen this, is the way that we do discovery sometimes. When the system is not properly set up, we do discovery outside of the development teams, and then somehow we make all these decisions and prepare all the backlogs for the development teams to deliver. And that's obviously not going to end very well, because then your teams are focused on, yes, delivering work, but they don't have a chance to influence how the upstream decisions are made.
And one thing that you were also alluding to in your initial story was this perhaps even old school expectation that decisions have to somehow be bubbled up, no matter what kind of decisions they are. Like, for example, if two teams have to agree on something, they have to somehow involve their managers to get that agreement to be made. While in Scrum, we expect the teams to be able to talk to each other and come to shared agreements. Sometimes they need to decide which stakeholders to involve, and that may not be just the two teams. We may need an architect or a person from operations or even a person from marketing, whatever the topic might be. And we need to get them together and make those decisions. But in more traditional hierarchical organizations, we have the very often implicit, sometimes explicit need to go up the chain and get the decisions made higher in the hierarchy.
Absolutely. And if you look at organizational models like the Western model, for example, what you have just described is part of the difference between a bureaucratic organization and a generative organization. A generative organization will be able to bridge and flatten all the structures and network and run experiments effectively across the organization without being limited by the current hierarchy and roles.
Absolutely. That's a great point. We need to look at how the organization is set up and how that makes it easier or harder to adopt and use Scrum to deliver value. Thank you for sharing that story, Salvatore.
Thank you.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.